Hello YouTube, and welcome to an extremely special music theory analysis video. My name is Stephen Weigel, and I'm mostly a piano player, singer, and microtonalist. My artistry over the last 5 years or so has been about putting together multi-instrumental covers of music that sounds meaningfully colorful or unique to my playing style in some way. It naturally takes a long time, but it's important to create material on music that is a result of dedication, quirkiness, and hard-earned ability. On that note, I'd like to introduce a hilarious album to you, if you haven't heard of it, of which this video celebrates the 10-year anniversary of exactly. Happy Thanksgiving. If you've heard of the TV show Bob's Burgers or Archer, you may know that the protagonists are both voiced by actor Jon Benjamin, who has a low, unforgettable, deadpan sort of voice, kind of like this.
Right, because he just wants me to stop yelling at him at all times. So that worked out for him.
As a certified comedian, he decided to create the album Well I Should Have, where the subtitle is Learned to Play Piano. So for this album, he paid jazz musicians Scott Kreitzer, David Finck, and Jonathan Peretz to play music while he played along on piano without knowing how to do so, of course. The result is deeply astonishing, as Jon Benjamin intentionally recorded the album to sound bad, though it's not as bad as you might expect. Now, when I first heard this album, it was an incredible experience, as I am fascinated by the idea of unintentional sounding music. Generally, playing random sounding notes as a beginner on the instrument will sound distinctly different from coming up with highly non-repetitive sequences of notes. As in atonal practices. And I think my analysis here shines a light on this. The various shades of in-between this can occupy is a rich and controversial space, but it isn't controversial for any real reasons. They're made up by certain types of listeners who can't accept how things are. The snobs can't accept that sometimes jazz music really does sound random to people, and the basics can't accept that, yes, it is worthwhile and possible to hear patterns in music that take effort to understand. Thus, the idea of playing random notes and calling it jazz annoys all the right people, and now, as far as I'm aware, this album is the only time such a premise has been this amusing and successful, at least to me. In other situations, they are usually ham-fisted truisms from the aforementioned groups of snobs and basics who both miss the point. But I feel qualified to evaluate this album as someone who breathes music theory, plays extensive piano, and has listened to jazz made after 2020. Check out Cecil McLaurin's Solvent. Now, the main goal of this video is to dive into each piano track on the album and explain, using music theory, why certain pieces pass as jazz piano or not. I will also be ranking them from most to least intentional sounding. One thing I noticed is that at some moments, Jon's playing sounds quite a lot like normal jazz piano, and I wasn't the only one. You can check Reddit and YouTube comments yourself and see that they are littered with people who are taken aback at the surprising coherence on some of the tracks, despite Jon's complete lack of experience with the instrument. We'll also see how these analytical facts raise several intriguing questions about the music-making process in this environment. Now, there are 8 tracks on the album. Deal with the Devil, which is simply dialogue that sets up the premise in a funny way, with Bob's Burgers voice actors Kirsten Shaw and Aziz Ansari. It Had to Be You, the jazz standard. Soft Jazzercise, a simple piano vamp in C with Jon narrating over the top. And Amy's song, The Bum Steer, an obscene butt song. The other 4 tracks are all named I Can't Play Piano Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, and Part 4. For our purposes, that is, observing musical features corresponding with intentionality, we are interested in the I Can't Play Piano tracks, which are all traditional sounding tunes plus Jon, and It Had to Be You. That means that the other 3 are all completely planned, like in normal commercialized styles. This is minutia, but I suppose Amy's song, The Bum Steer, is the most intentional sounding since it's musically coordinated. Deal with the Devil gets second, since I assume the dialogue is scripted, but some riffing could occur, and Soft Jazzercise gets third, as Jon's faux meditation directions seem quite spontaneous. Evaluating dialogue versus music can be apples and oranges, but that's not as much of a pitches and rhythms question. Let's dive in. First, we'll listen to a few parts of the I Can't Play Piano tracks in order and then discuss them, but not the full things, because then YouTube will get mad about copyright. You know how it is. This first one, I Can't Play Piano Part 1, sounds incredibly out in my mind, and spoiler alert, it's the most outside and unintentional Jon's playing is going to sound, which is insane to think about. So it's a great opener, of course. Let's go over some characteristics of the tune. I transcribed some of the early solos here so you can read a little of the craziness, and when possible, given implied chord progressions. I say implied because really the bass and sax player are holding down the harmonic structure between only two voices, so we don't get full-sounding chords. But the walking bass line textures arpeggiate chords we can use, as is common in this kind of thing. So this tune is fast, swung, and in the key of B-flat, using circle of fifths progressions. Now, B-flat would use the notes B-flat, C, D, E-flat, F, G, A, and B-flat. But there's lots of chromaticism throughout the sax and bass lines already, even without Jon, where the saxophone has a lot of the spicier alterations as blue notes, and the bass outlines traditional chords or chromatically voice leads to the next root. There are also various rhythmic breaks where the instruments all drop out except for Jon, where he is quite exposed. The thing is, all the parameters in this track work against Jon's playing, camouflaging as normal jazz piano. The tune is fast, so it gives him less time to think. It's swung, but Jon doesn't play with the swung feel in this song almost the entire time. It's rhythmic, but Jon's rhythm is unconfident and often drags severely enough that his playing must be interpreted as tuplets. It's traditional, making any untraditional choices stick out like a sore thumb. It's in a key where it's not easy to simply play black or white keys to blend in as a beginner cheat code. So it's common for him to play the notes A and B in a row over a B-flat chord like this, giving the impression that he is not using the right scale. And when you put this all together with the exposed sections, you get something very accidental, and there isn't much of a sense of phrasing or musical sentences. So good solos will often have like a musical logic to them. You know, the rhythms and melodies will kind of copy each other in a self-similar way. They have an ebb and flow or a rise and fall. Maybe they'll match musical thoughts that the other performers have. This sort of thing is almost entirely absent in I Can't Play Piano Part 1 in Jon's piano playing, and it's that combination of shaky rhythm without the right swing, indecisiveness on notes and not knowing the scale, and a lack of phrasing that make this sound highly random, like Sarah Brand's Red Dress. In Jon's improvisation on this track, we discover that there are more wrong-sounding notes than right-sounding notes. And so the right-sounding spots end up acting like little islands throughout the music. And the roles of surprise, tension, and release are sort of reversed as a result. So I couldn't resist. I transcribed the first part. So maybe I'll put the music on the screen here. Let's go over a little bit of that. Then it'll be fun to examine each section of Jon's and describe what he played and how it's unusual. So the first chord progression takes us through the circle of fifths in B-flat, with G going to C minor as a secondary dominant. This secondary dominant resolves properly in the same spot within the first three groups of 4 bars, arriving in different ways. And the last 4 bars of that 16-bar group use B-flat, E-flat, F, and B. And hopefully you can see this on this screen. So I'll go ahead and just play that first part, and you'll see how it sounds in a traditional sense. This is just that first part right here. Okay, so those are the first 16 bars, and you can also hear that saxophone, you know, that saxophone is hitting the B-flat over and over to really give that sense of, you know, being the tonic in addition to the bass line. So we really get that sense of key. Now, we're going to listen to Jon's first entrance, and it's going to be real interesting. On Jon's first entrance, we have a new circle of fifths progression starting from A minor going all the way back to B flat. So right? So if we just circle all the way through the circle of fifths there, we'd get like A minor, D, G minor, C, F, B flat, right? So I think that additional layer of confusion starting so far back also makes this entrance jarring. It takes us out of the key for a moment, but then we're brought there. We're brought back to B flat. So the progressions in the song are all derived from either those first 16 bars, which return to B flat at the beginning of every 4 bars and use G moving to C minor then F, or they start on A minor and move through the circle of fifths movements back to B flat. So every chord progression either comes from that very first one you just heard of the 16 seconds or the circle of fifths one. Every time Jon plays in this song, it is an event, and his presence is notable. So in this song, I'll just call each time he plays a break. So break 1 is his first solo here, so let's go ahead and listen to it. Okay, there's his first solo right there. So, if break 1 is his first solo, it looks like he's exploring notes that are kind of next to each other in secundal harmony, which is a common technique for him in this track. Now, the notes he's using don't come from the chords he's playing over, of course, and there's very little united rhythm or a sense of leading to something impactful. We could make this kind of solo sound intentional with good rhythm and notes from the scale, while still using secundal harmony. Like, he's kind of, like, up here and going, and he's kind of waffling around and playing, like, the grace notes indecisively. If I were making this solo sound rhythmically decisive, and using sort of the melodic contour that he uses, I might do something like... playing with just, like, a little bit of swing, playing the notes in the scale, that sort of thing. And you can make this sound good, too, like... right, just going back and forth. Just as long as you are, like, kind of in the pocket and have the same kind of swing that the band has. Like, this can be an intentional move, right? But it's that combination that really gets you. And we'll hear this throughout more of the song. Now, we're going to hear the main tune again here. Now, this next part right here is break 2. The band drops out so that Jon can play. So, let's listen to this part. Okay, so this part is really adventurous on Jon's part. Here, I think what happens is Jon's lack of swing and his dragging take over so much that he's actually lost the tempo. It sounds like he's slowing down relative to the band, hence the odd tuplets I must use, sort of like the 7 tuplets. Actually, there's another transcription of Jon's It Had to Be You solo that I found right before I started making this video, which makes me so happy that I don't have to transcribe it, that somebody else did it. And there's another septuplet in that. So you can see some septuplets here accidentally that I just had to count out myself. So, he really commits to using a lot of E's and B's to tell us that he doesn't know what key we're in, because those are really at odds with B flat. There's a certain aura that hitting a bunch of white keys has, and this track has that subjective feeling to me, even though plenty of black keys are thrown in. I think this is the only time that Jon's rhythm is so inaccurate that he truly loses the band. I mean, other times it's just sloppy. And now, the other thing is that the band is on it, and they're keeping that same tempo, but Jon is dragging. So, it sounds really strange, because it seems like the band is coming in early, but if you keep their tempo really well, you can hear that they stay on and hit like every 4 bars. I'll count it along with you, like this. Let's see. Flawless. When the band returns, Jon starts hitting single piano notes along with the band for the first time. I think this is kind of like what he thinks comping is just these single hit piano stabs, which does happen a lot. And then here I think the short single white notes that he's playing coincidentally match more with the implied chords, helped by the fact that the band at this moment is playing the circle of fifths progression from A minor all the way through to B flat. So like, he has a few more moments where he can play white keys and not sound like he's out of the scale because of that. Jon plays a high G over an implied C chord, a high D over an implied G chord, and a high F over an implied F chord. And those all fit, wow. So let's take a listen to that. Yeah, did you hear that? Sadly, we've run out of sheet music at this point because I refused to transcribe all of this, but I did transcribe enough to just see how messy his notes were on the page. When I first listened to it, I was like, okay, I'm getting such a white key vibe, but there's other black keys there too, so I wanted to know what the percentage of black to white was, really. On this next break, we'll see Jon meandering around white keys A, B, and C with the low G to hang out, and when the notes move up at the end of the turnaround, that almost sounds like a phrase. It would just need more of a distinctive shape with more notes, or by strongly leading somewhere. I think this is the closest he gets to a real phrase in this, and that part sounds like this. Yeah, that. He has this moment where he goes down and he comes up and he's chromatically going up through notes. He could finish it out by playing the next B flat and being in the key, or playing some other notes to kind of end it, but he sort of hangs out. It's not very decisive. It's really a rhythmic thing. But yeah, next when the band is back, Jon gets even more adventurous and starts comping entirely on white keys. This unfortunately heralds some B on B flat clashes in a context where A, B flat, and C are used, but because of the sparse bass lines and hits, it doesn't seem as intrusive as it could be. And as time goes on, I don't know, it's like they seem to fit more. For example, the chords that are played earlier don't fit as much as the later ones. I think the later ones sound like standard comp voicings one might use on C and G. I wonder if he's playing the same voicing in both hands at times, like doubling it. Well, I'm using sixths there, but Jon would be like using seconds because they're easy to play. So you just like be playing maybe a bunch of notes or some notes, or just kind of like random groups of them where his hands are a little bit spread out. Here, let me compare the comping a little bit. That's F and B from a G7 hit. And when he plays it and it's over the G vamp, it kind of sounds right, but it sounds a little bit wronger if the band is playing in B flat. A little bit of fourth action there. That almost sounds like something you would do, like if it's stacked up in fourths. He's not stacking it in fourths exactly, but it has that kind of vibe. Okay, now you've gotten to a really interesting part. At the end of this section, we hear Jon match the band. Totally sounds kind of bluesy and earned and everything. Crazy. How much of a coincidence is this? I'm not sure. It certainly seems like a change of heart. Like, previously Jon had just been hitting black keys if they were nearby, instead of directly finding the tonic note. Maybe he figured it out right then. Let's listen to that again, like this. So Jon here has found 4, 1, and then the flat 3 there. So that's E flat, B flat, and D flat. And since those are all black keys, I think that's probably how he found those. Now, in the third break here, Jon's rhythm is slightly more on the tempo, and he finds that small group of notes, and he plays it, and it sounds more intentional because it's slightly more related to the mode, like the 1, the flat 3, and the 4 scale degrees, or B flat, D flat, and E flat. After that moment, other instincts take over, and he's back to banging out B's and E's. This moment after a string of notes where he hits B and E softly is so out of kilter to me. Like, it's so strange because the notes are really soft and unconfident and extremely out of the key, so all that combines together. Extra cringe, just the way we like it here. Maybe this could be considered as rhythmically def as the first break, but I don't think it's quite at that level. It's interesting to hear a flurry of notes being hit at the end of this one to try and imitate moving through the notes quickly. So I'll show you that solo here. Right? And he kind of like tries to hit scale degree too, but maybe hits the B a little bit. So that's the first part of the solo. Now listen to this ending part. That soft one, that little soft B and E hit there is just, it's soft and it puts us back in the wrong scale. So it's like, it's got like a double sense of wrongness. It's great. Now, you hear at the end there, that little, like, flourish descending. This, like, where he's just kind of, like, hitting chromatic keys and going downwards. So, with precise movements, that would be, like, a good musical idea at the end of a phrase, because if you hear the fast part and it changes to something else, that can be interesting. In the fourth break, Jon hits some bigger chords. And since he hits the same one a few times, it sounds more planned. The rhythm isn't tight, but you can also tell that he's having thoughts that match the music around him by picking up the swing just a little bit. And his white key hits, as before, are helped by the band moving from A minor all the way through the circle fifths to B flat, as before. Then there's a bass solo, which is standard stuff. Let me see if I can find break 4 here. Oh, here we go. Actually a really interesting chord, and I'd like to figure it out live for you. Let's see if I can do it. It sounds like there's a low C here. It's kind of wider than his other chords, right? I think maybe he's playing like a high D up here. And he's got some other notes that he might be just playing with his thumb. Okay, so I think his high notes are B and A, so he's probably just spreading his hands out over the keyboards. And he happens to just hit a lot of white keys, because that B is all the way up there, so he's got to go down and hit those. So it's just kind of this big, wide, weird, like, G13 shape. I think it's something like he has a G and a C down there, and then, like, there's A and B maybe, and a B up here. I'm missing some sauce here. He's hitting some extra keys with fingers by spreading them out. We've evaluated that chord as long as I'm comfortable with. Continuing on. I think this next section with the band is really exciting because Jon starts to comp a really, really spicy chord that doesn't fit at all, but is mostly a black key chord instead of a white key chord. It's got G flat, A flat, C flat, and D flat, as I would call it in this key, or you could say B. And over B flat, you know, those notes just aren't lining up. So let's see if we can find that. Okay, great. So that's that insane comping chord that you just heard. You know, of course, those notes would be the flat 6, flat 7, flat 2, and flat 3. The flat 7 and flat 3 are recommended blue notes that the sax is using a lot, and that Jon used earlier in break 3 to sound right. But the flat 6 is generally not as used over the chord root because it can change the identity so much. Like, if you have B flat, F, G as the baseline notes, you could call that B flat 6. Or if it's all part of it together, but, you know, B flat, F, G flat together gets named G flat major 7 with a B flat in the bass more often. This combined with the flat 2 gives it an out sound. The flat 2 would normally be used in a dominant chord, but Jon is banging it out over all the chords, even ones that imply chromatic clusters. This is a shortcut to taboo clash in Western music theory. Playing G flat as your bass line is on F, then G. That, or playing B as your bass line is B, then C. Right, like that. That occurs in abundance here at various points. I think it's the most unintentional comp in the piece. He should have stuck to white keys, I guess. Also, these piano hits are unevenly played, with not all the notes hit at once exactly as we would expect someone trained to do, but the rhythm kind of matches the band here. Okay, let's try a little bit of this next section. At 2:51, Jon vamps with the band some more. He's comping chords, but here he's knee-deep in white keys, and it sounds the most proper over the implied G chords, where an all-white chord matches G13 qualities. In fact, if you kind of bang out lots of white keys and they're over a G chord, it's pretty much going to be like G13 kind of stuff. So then Jon ends up sort of defaulting into that because of what he's doing. This is another moment where he head from A minor to B flat, so it sounds more in line through the circle of fifths. It's also meant to be a solo moment as the band quiets down. And at the end, we observe a flurry of white keys upwards at the end, which has no coordination, but at least signals a musical gesture, a thought that could be corrected and turned into a real flourish. He's more on here. At this moment, this is about like 3 minutes and 11 seconds in, he starts to play these belonging notes, like just kind of purely coincidentally, by accidentally excluding B and E from the vocabulary for a prolonged period of time, I suppose. This is the most coherent part of Jon's playing in this track. He saved the best for last. As the band cadences, Jon hits 1 flat 6, and then 1 7, and then he hits a B flat minor chord while the bass has E flat, D flat, B flat, and it was perfect timing. And it kind of fits in, which I didn't think he was going to do. Like, he's basically not hitting triads most of the time. The G flat acting like a melodic flat 6 here sounds intentional, but at other times when you have F sharp going to G connoting a G scale, which is an unrelated scale over a B flat scale, that sounds less intentional. I can show you this piece and then demonstrate the bass line here, like this. Right? So here, you have B flats, A flat, and G flat, making a 7th. And then this B flat resolving to A, and that A works over the dominant chord of the key. We have some sparse hits where we hear some 5-1, and a buried chord, which I suspect is kind of like the earlier G flat, A flat, C flat, D, but it's like fainter, so it's less obtrusive. Kind of like this. That one. I think that maybe E, F, A flat, B flat, D flat, because he's hit the E flat, E and F at the same time with his thumb. Now that ending part is amazing. Because here, when he goes up, the melody, if it was resolving intentionally, the A would resolve to the B flat. But since Jon doesn't know that that's the right note, he just skips it to play B, and then A and B are over a B flat again, and then he resolves it up to C, because that's the next note, and it sounds a little bit more right with the chord. And then he plays C and F at the end there, which is really just uniquely funny. Like, that ending gesture is like a 7, sharp 1, 2, or A, B, C. So, yeah, like A, B flat, C would sound really right, too, by just tweaking one note. But just because you have that B there, it clashes with the B flat when you go like that. So, yeah, exactly as I mentioned before, it's using these Bs against B flats, chromatic clusters moving across different voices, that help create that feeling of being in the wrong scale. Then his CF at the end fits with the B flat chord, but other notes are added that are less intentional sounding, like E flat, B, A. There's a big hit at the end, and I think it could be like a D augmented with C in the bass. And then the ending gestures like this DF with DEF, which sounds rhythmically clumsy, but it has more potential to sound in than tons of runs with Bs in them while the song is in B flat. So let's listen to the ending and see if that all matches. It's important to reiterate that a lot of these kinds of ideas could sound intentional in isolation, especially in non-traditional settings, but it's the notion of creating a traditional space and then violating it with this kind of playing that makes it so jarring mentally. That kind of thing is simply not often done, even in avant-garde spaces. His grace notes also sound like flubs a lot of the time, which comes from not playing them rhythmically. From my perspective, it sounds like he relied mostly on white keys, but used some black. And he made choices that involved B's and E's. And when he did that, those generally sounded the most wrong. Or when he tried to play chords that weren't built entirely from white keys, with the exception of the B-flat minor chord at the end. That little, like... And then he hits this. Just right there. Yeah, that part's crazy. Yeah. That. He just hits it right there. Crazy. I love it. As things move forward, we're going to hear Jon improve in his piano playing. I think in the session we just heard, I Can't Play Piano Part 1, Going over it in detail helped us realize many points that weren't brought up before. Like in this first track, we see Jon learning increasingly about following the rhythm of the band as he plays over time, and finding more notes that work with what's being played in the background. Like, probably if you asked Jon about this, he would insist on having not learned anything, though. This track could be a case study in analyzing how quickly someone can adapt to following along with music as a beginner. So to what extent did Jon learn more about how to play as he went along? Various sites mention that he has no formal musical training, but music and his singing is a huge part of the show in Bob's Burgers. So I think he has the skills to navigate these situations with training like many people. Before analyzing some more, let's go over this album's story properly. Jon recorded it with the jazz musicians, but those musicians were upset at the situation. I assume either due to snobbery or Jon not telling them the full story. Hey, you want to record something that sounds terrible? Lots of musicians might not want to be a part of that because they've already had to fight so hard for recognition, and so much is riding on these fickle notions of image that people have about you. They did put their names on the album, though, so I think in some sense they approved of the project upon completion. There was just some initial shock upon walking in and Jon explaining the situation to them. How did he explain that? I'm dying to know the details we don't have right now about the recording sessions and how material was prepared. I assume the jazz musicians picked the songs as Jon knows nothing about jazz, doesn't listen to it, and doesn't particularly like it. In which order were the songs recorded, and how much were the musicians trying to design the experience around giving him something easy to play with? We don't have this information. But because I Can't Play Piano Part 1 is first, and sounds the most unintentional by far, here's my theory. In any session, there's a little adjustment as the musicians figure out each other's capabilities, and this is no different. I think the musicians played I Can't Play Piano Part 1 first, and afterwards figured out that they should play songs where Jon could play either all black keys or all white keys, and sound right most of the time, because that's precisely what we see on the other songs. All three of the other I Can't Play Piano tunes use C major or A minor scales that are on the white keys, although in A minor we can get G sharps and harmonic minor as an exception. The other one, It Had to Be You, is in A flat, which mostly works if you play all black keys, except that there should mostly be G naturals instead of G flats. As we'll soon see, Jon can sometimes get away with playing G flats and having them work, depending on the implied chord he is on. Here are more details that would fill out this analysis that we could wonder about all day. Where do the I Can't Play Piano tunes come from? Did the musicians come up with it on the spot? Is it prepared, improvised? Are they stock progressions that don't reference the song? I don't recognize them from anywhere, so my guess is that they are stock improvisations. Also, the first three have extremely similar vibes to them as up-tempo tunes with a lot of fast notes, but I Can't Play Piano Part 1 is the fastest. How much effort is Jon putting in? This is another question that one should ask. He's creating the album for comedy, right? Just to see what happens, I think. As a social experiment, it also makes sense that he would try to sound like a jazz pianist, but as a beginner. That is, I don't think Jon is ever playing badly on purpose, but is simply putting in his best effort to play musically, despite his level at the instrument. Things are more interesting that way to see if he can pass as the genre the album purports to be. In other words, he doesn't have any vendetta to embarrass jazz musicians, but simply thinks it would be funny to play randomly and see if it could pass as jazz. With all this baggage in mind, let's check out I Can't Play Piano Part 2. Since this song is in C, Jon can play all white keys and mostly sound within the scale, which he does. In the beginning, we can hear the up-tempo main tune, which Jon tries to imitate rhythmically, and he almost succeeds. That's impressive, even though the rhythm does sound quite sloppy and drags. I think most of the time when Jon is playing something difficult with multiple notes, he flubs them. When playing big chords this way, it means that the notes aren't hit evenly, and in cases of individual notes, it means grace notes don't line up with the tempo. This isn't always true, though. When Jon is playing single melodic notes and has anticipated his gesture, that tendency disappears. I'll try not to mention that for every single bullet point. That said, here in this intro, the rhythmic sloppiness is the main beginner-sounding feature here, not the musical imitation or the scale, which is in key. So I'll play this beginning part for you, and you'll hear what I mean. Here he comes. He could keep imitating the rhythm and going up and down, but not hitting like groups of notes. In the rest of the song, I noticed several other features throughout. Like, for one thing, he plays individual notes more with the band's rhythm as arpeggiations. Perhaps the band told him to do this, or maybe he's picking it up on his own. He started doing that in part 1 for the first time, so I suppose this is next. He also creates more moments where a real musical idea using some degree of self-similarity is expressed. Having some degree of repetition built in makes things memorable. I think he imagines rhythms and tries to play them, which is really what musicians are doing as well. It's something you use all the time, but you simply hone it as you get more into the phenomenon. So check out this clip right here at 31. You'll hear what I mean. See, those single notes aren't too bad. That's a pretty good musical idea right there. So let's see if I can play it. Now, these are real musical ideas that build on each other, right? The first descending triad is G, E, C. The next one is A, F, C. Maybe I started a little late. Here, like this. Like this. That's a good rhythm. G, E, C, A, F, C. Those arpeggiate the 1 and the 4 chords. Probably by accident. The high note, of course, is an E. This is another tactic soloists use, hanging out on one note to build anticipation, often in climactic moments. The comping is somewhat convincing in this one. He's using reasonable compact voicings with the scale. Some of them really sound like normal voicings someone could use over a vamp in C. Some of them sound like isolated flubbed seconds. It's really kind of a mixture. So, like, maybe the ones that sound like a real comping might sound like... He's kind of playing the same keys. And then the ones that are a little bit flubbed are like... It's like maybe he's playing the same thing, but if he's moving around more, he makes more of these flubs, and then it just sounds like isolated secundal events that aren't in rhythm. But if he stays on the same one, he pretty much, it imparts that intentionality a little bit. But yeah, another example of a built-upon musical idea Jon uses when soloing is a trill, then a higher note. And then it's moved up once again. This is a textbook musical question and answer. I'll show you where that is. And then again. So you can hear that, like, that trill happens at the beginning of a bar, right? Then 4 bars go by, and he comes in at the next group of 4 bars with another trill on different notes. He was using D and F before, and then he uses C and E the second time. So, that's like this idea of moving by sequence. So this is, he's got some musicality here. We can tell because of the self-similarity that's going on in these solos. We see that he's got the skills to spontaneously think of these ideas as a soloist that complement each other. Now, he's mostly on the white keys this entire time, but there's one big obvious note out of the scale in this one, and it's a stray F sharp that Jon sadly decides to play right as the sax is playing G, then F in the same octave, making it the most obvious that it's a chromatic cluster, probably more obvious even than in piano playing part 1. This is our ultimate Western taboo, as I mentioned earlier. So, that is right here. Yeah, do you hear that? The piano hitting this, and then the saxophone hits G-F. And it's doing some chromatic stuff in the theme, but then they're playing in C. And here's the unfortunate moment. As he's coming down that melody, it's this G-F when Jon is just hammering on this F sharp. So you get that amazing chromatic cluster between the instruments, and it's so... A lot of times you can get away with melodic chromatic clusters as long as you don't just play all 3 of the notes at once. Like, 3 notes that are all, like, half steps apart adjacently, like F, F sharp, and G. But here, it's so close to being that you notice it really painfully, I think. In the finale of this one, Jon clearly matches the rhythm of the melody but doesn't know what notes to play, and does hit some unrelated black keys trying to track them down. His final notes are F, G, which could match a C cadence. So that part starts here. F, F, G. Shockingly normal sounding, though, still extremely beginner in its rhythmic execution. This one might be the most in terms of pitch, but out in terms of rhythm, I think. Besides the obvious exception of part 1, which is all over the place. Now, let's move on to I Can't Play Piano Part 3. Well, guess what? It's also in C, a scale that just uses the white keys, just like I Can't Play Piano Part 2 for most of the time. So Jon is free to play the white keys, hooray. In this piece, we get to hear call and response between Scott on the sax and Jon. We hear several musical thoughts from Jon as a result. The beginning here is really remarkable. Check this out. Okay, that entire intro sets us up, so it's all call and response. Jon knows when to respond. He's not lost. He's following the tempo. There's a call and a response. And it sounds like he's trying to copy the rhythm exactly. And I think his feel on this one is a lot closer, even if he's a little bit indecisive. Like, he's mostly capturing the rhythm, even if it's hard for him to get the melody notes. So, like, here, he matches the melodic contour sometimes. On the last 2 call and responses before the bass enters, he ascends upwards like the sax in the second to last phrase, and he imitates the rhythm pretty well in the last one, even though it's like kind of not an easy rhythm for him. And you can tell, I think, the sax is giving notes that aren't in C to be sneaky, so Jon kind of turns to comping a little bit. There's also one response here where he plays really softly and kind of unconfidently that sounds less intentional, like this. That one he just kind of gives up on putting rhythm into it and plays softly. So it's just like one unintentional response in this sea of like mostly their ones. That's a tricky rhythm, and Jon repeats it right. Oh, I think it's just a, like, if this is a quarter right here, it's like dotted eighths all in a row, right? Yeah, exactly. So like a fast double tresillo. So Jon's probably used to hearing that rhythm in pop music because it's everywhere as well. I would buy Jon's comping in C in the next part. For some reason, the voicing seems to be more effective here than in part 2. It's like the rhythm is more together and it repeats, which is helpful. There's also a descending theme in the chord comping, making it seem a little melodic instead of just hits. Well done, Jon! We'll try this at 31, show you how it sounds. Now, for Jon's solo, he hangs out on one note a lot, like an F, over implied C chords. This works because of the sparse texture, and later in the solo, when Jon changes to playing F sharp, it sounds a lot more at odds with what is going on, like he found another note to hang out on, and that's at like 1:06 in. The theme here is simple, but it has that double structure again, where he plays some theme, then once again with slightly variating it. Now, however, this isn't a question and answer because it simply hangs out on the same note. I'll show you this section right here, and you can judge for yourself. So yeah, like, more rhythmically realized, but also a lot more basic. Now, we can geek out over certain call and response moments between the sax and Jon, which comprise much of the rest of the piece. I have a particular soft spot for this one moment where Scott leaves space for Jon to play, and he just plays a single G. So they're ping-ponging back and forth, playing stuff back and forth, and, like, it's a legitimate call and response, and, like, it's going pretty well. It's just that there's some times where there's, like, a lot of rhythm going on, and Jon needs to play something that, like, has some finesse to it, and he just plays, like, one note. So, here's the moment where he plays one note. Oh, that's just two notes. Okay, here it is. Just G. That's it. Here's some other ones. Triplets! Right. So, like, you know, he's got some rhythms going on. Jon also engages in glissando here, which he doesn't do anywhere else as far as I know. Pretty neat. During another solo on Jon's part, he's moving between a small group of notes, C, A, G, as a soloist would, but with little attention paid to the band's swing. You could interpret this as a fancy tuplet, but things are just shaky as usual. And this part is right here. And then he starts the yelling back and forth. Now, it's funny, because when he's playing these notes, right, he's a little bit not in the swing, but there's a part of me that's, I think some of those are actually triplets that are just a bit draggy in, like, a kooky way. So, if you smooth that out just a little bit, you could turn that into, like, cool triplets. You see what I mean? So it's, like, a lot less unintentional than earlier. There's also, of course, like, you know, this impassioned yelling during later call and response moments, like when Jon expresses himself melodically here. Genuinely, it's mostly on rhythms that have a double structure, which move by step and often sit on the same note for several hits in a row, likely so that Jon can think before moving on to the next note. This is a beginner soloist trademark, but also kosher in the music itself. Jon seems unfazed by the swing at times, once even playing quarter notes on a high D. So that sort of section sounds like this. It's so just unapologetically just square to keep with the beat, because he's yelling. It's great. The ending of this one is genuinely kind of surprising with how close Jon is to locking in more rhythm and creating melodic contours that have a shape, even through playing random notes. At 4 minutes and 20 seconds in, his melodic contours move up and down in a back and forth way, but grabbing different white notes along the way. He even manages to play some on-sounding, unextended chords in C major. Like, at 2 points, he hits an actual C chord proper, though in one hit, he has G-flat and B-flat in the chord for no reason, and that brings us down to earth. I'll show you. So, that sounds like this right here. That one, right? He just straight up hits it. There it is again, C again. So he's found C, and he's hitting it. He rarely hits triads, so this is really important. There's that G-flat, B-flat moment. Something like that. Another really interesting thing about the way H. Jon Benjamin plays fast notes as a beginner is how short he plays them. It's almost like he's kind of like afraid to touch the notes. Overall, this track allows us to hear more of Jon's musical instincts through the call and Overall, I think this track allows us to hear more of Jon's musical instincts through the call and response, presented in their best light. His ideas are crystallized and, given in much more of an accurate manner than part 2, and as a result are generally much more basic, taking the form of quarter notes, repeating the same note over and over before changing ideas and things like that. Okay, now, I Can't Play Piano, part 4. Being in A minor means that Jon could conflict slightly more by playing Gs when there are G sharps. That can be played off as a sharp 9 or Hendrix chord in many situations if done right. Like a... something like that. But I don't spot a lot of that in this piece. Instead, I get more of the vibe that Jon's white key chords here are less in accordance with traditional jazz practice than 2 and 3. And that's because of the role of the minor sixth in these sorts of things. Like when you're comping over A minor chords, a high F isn't recommended, as it clashes with the E and makes things sound more like F major 7th than A minor extended chords. Like, you'd want F sharp over this, but if you have F, then it starts to sound like this. A little bit more, like we talked about earlier. This is precisely the kind of knowledge that a piano player can use to their advantage, and Jon, through pure happenstance of how he groups white keys together, sounds more right in C than in A minor, because he simply likes to hit a lot of Fs. It's like hitting Bs in part 1, but with much less violence outside the changes, simply a beginner voicing not implying A minor chords as much as it could. However, the comping here is much more rhythmically on, and Jon is playing the same voicings repeatedly, imparting more of a sense of purposefulness. I'm amazed he was able to find and remember those. In this piece, Jon matches syncopated rhythms again with a bit of lag and playing the simultaneous notes unsimultaneously. This sounds intentional as he's with the band. Here's an idea of what his comping sounds like here. Yeah, you get the idea. Now here's this. Let me see if I can figure out this first chord. Kind of like that. He's moving around a fourth, and he's got those Fs in there. Now sometimes his Gs are in the comping while an E chord is being played, so you'll get a brief G sharp G clash as well. It is possible and does happen a bit. You can hear in the very beginning he has some black keys, like when he's descending, which could have been used as neighbor tones going back and forth and returning, but instead he hangs out on them, which sounds a little bit outside. Whenever he wanders outside of the scale and hangs out on spicy notes, it really shows that he won't use that kind of note in a phrase to form a musical idea. Like, sometimes spicy notes can be a random choice that changes a sequence. Great example, he's got, like, 2 B flats in this piece, and one of them sounds really wrong, and one of them sounds great. There's a part where he plays a C7 over an implied E chord, and that is relatively late in the piece, around here, like this. Hear that? Like that. You got that as you're going. Actually, it's funny because as long as they don't play B down there, you've just got like a gnarly, like augmented kind of shape where you have like E, G sharp, G, B flat, and then some C. So you could say it's like E augmented, sharp 9, sharp 11, you know, if you wanted. And that's like a legit jazz thing. Here, let me hear if there's B in the bass. Oh, that's unfortunate. I think we have B in the bass. Yeah, that sounds really wrong. and I knew it sounded wronger than just being a spicy extension. So the bass basically plays B there, which means if you have B flat and C, it's the chromatic cluster. It's the Western taboo we talked about earlier. Now there's one B flat Jon has as a soloistic note that sounds perfect. I'm going to see if I can find it. Yeah. Oh, there it is. Here, this is so good. That B flat right there is just a great note leading down to that A. Let me hear the changes here. Now let's see, he goes down to A there, doesn't he? He has accidentally done a Neapolitan sixth movement. If, like, the bass is playing a D, and then he resolves down to E, and they resolve to E, it sounds really intentional and great. But then when he plays the B flat and C over a B, then it's different. So, yeah. So, I don't know, in this piece, I think his melodic movement is more convincing than in part 2. This is the track where it feels like he can execute ambitious ideas a little bit more adeptly. In part 2, he bit off more than he could chew, and in part 3, the ideas are very basic, but in part 4, he splits that difference a little more. For comping on the white keys, they sound like standard voicings. For comping on the white keys this should be a 2. For comping on the white keys to sound like standard voicings, he would need to use F less over A minor chords. But the rhythm being consistent, and him playing the same chord shapes, nullifies that quite a lot, actually. Repetition legitimizes, after all. Finally, let's go over It Had to Be You and its beginning. We find that Jon just playing black keys gets him reasonably close to being able to play extensions over the right implied chords in A flat. In this tune, he is on the black keys for the intro and outro, where he plays along to the tune and decides on his own notes, but matches the rhythm. Whenever he makes a decision to go to the white keys, which he does during his 2 solos, it always sounds incredibly outside of the key, and thus super unintentional. It doesn't meander as much as part 1 does, though. He does this in the first solo here. I'll show you. So, like, that's really outside of the key, of course, but his sense of rhythm is actually really good, and a lot of times he's even imitating the melody rhythm, like this da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da. You know, these kinds of things. He's just putting those in there. It's just that the notes don't match in the scale when he's soloing, because he's just deciding to use the white keys. So, supposedly, like, the rhythm's matching a lot, even though the pitch language is at odds. Those are the side effects of having a tune that our protagonist imagines as he plays. We can hear secundal harmony descending and imitating the rhythm in the solo. I found a really good spot where it imitates at around 1:47 in. Check this out. Right? Do-do-do-do-do. Like, da-da-da-da-da. Like, sort of in the mid part of the tune, right? So that's, taking what he's learned and applying it elsewhere. This kind of intervallic texture can happen in traditional soloing. Like, maybe I might play something like... And those, that comes from the secondary dominant and then, like, going to the 2 chords. So, like, the 5 of 2 and then the 2. The ending is interesting because Jon stays on the black keys and things sound correct. But then at the very end, he changes to white keys and things get messy. I'll show you that. It sounds like this. A flat, D flat trill. That's where he changed to the white keys there, where I was holding my hands up. So then it kind of stankifies the ending, like, pretty radically. It's funny, because the intro and outro, they have more intent behind them. So I was really interested in transcribing the introduction of this one, too, since the chord changes and melody are well documented as a jazz standard. Jon uses a lot of the black keys here, and I think the most out-sounding key is typically the G-flat. The G-flat over the F chord works as a flat 9. Right? He doesn't resolve it down, but it leaps to other notes within the scale. Then for 4 measures, he hammers on the G-flat while the bass plays B-flat F-G. Yeah. G-flat over a B-flat minor tonality by itself could work, although it would make things sound more like a G-flat root. But sadly, this bass line makes Jon's solo evocative of a chromatic cluster F, G-flat, and G. The E-flat 7 chord, or, whatever you want, it works out fine with G-flat and A-flat because the third is non-present, so this is allowed. Like, G-flat to A-flat is 2 melodic notes. Sound righter because G isn't heard in the chord. The F minor chord of the next bar is mostly okay, though Jon holds D-flat over it, which is less egregious than holding the G-flat over the B-flat minor 6 chord. A minor miracle happens as the band comes around to the beginning of the chord progression again with A-flat major 7. And I'd like to play this part for you right here. Listen to that part. Jon actually gets to A-flat from G, and I think he made a mistake, and he played G and he meant to play A-flat because he was like, oh, this isn't a black key. But little did he know, it was actually within the key as he plays it. But unfortunately, the other players have other ideas. Like, Jon has been playing G-flat, so you might think that he's going to do that here again and create an egregious clash between A-flat, the root, G, the major 7th, and G-flat, his note. One of the most obvious chromatic clusters one could create. But he not only plays G natural in this blessed serendipitous manner, but resolves it up to A-flat. But Scott and David both seemingly abandon him by playing G instead of the root A-flat. So this is normal for the sax players. They have the 7th on the melody note, and thus would be expected to have G. But for the bass player, this could have been an intentionally delayed return to A-flat, which does happen in the next bar, or a mistake. But the timing is hilarious, because then it means Jon is correctly playing A-flat over the bass having a low G, creating a dissonant minor 9th that, in this case, wasn't up to Jon. It wasn't his fault. Don't worry, though. The second time Jon plays along with the melody later, he totally plays G-flat over the A-flat major 7th chord a few times. Continuing onwards to the F7, Jon moves up to try and play what the sax is playing and matches its A-flat right before the bar, but not the A on the downbeat, playing B-flat instead. This results in the sax and piano clashing a half-step apart on the melody over the F7 chord, which very much gives the impression that Jon is playing the melody but ended up one note too high, instead of creating a fancy F add 11 extended chord. I'll show you that part. That sounds like... Right, he's got that note, while the sax says A. They are so far apart that it's not as dissonant as you might expect, though, but it is really melodically unintentional, I think. But the next time around on the 4-bar B-flat chord, Jon not only doesn't hang out on the G-flat as much, but other voices don't play G to conflict with it, which makes this passage sound more intended than the last one in some sense. Though the chromatic notes in the second bar are a little odd. I think the rest of the notes in this section can be considered kosher, if not a bit awkward at sometimes. You don't often play fourths over a chord except incidentally to prevent minor ninths, so the G-flats over the D-flat chord and the D-flats over the A-flat chord might be considered just a little beginner, but overall the rhythm matches a lot more nicely than in some numbers. Plus, those fourths over the chord aren't nearly as clashy as they could be due to the sparse duet texture of bass and sax only, where the third and fourth don't play at the same time. The D-flat in Jon's part in the A-flat chord does conflict briefly with the D in the sax part on that particular measure. Many of the notes Jon plays are seconds against the sax or bass, but that's common and expected in ninth chords or systems of harmony where more is allowed. So, I'm not going to go over the solos in this one in excruciating detail, but just know that he violently pivots to white keys when wanting to do something crazy, which sounds hilarious. Check out the transcription I linked in the description if you'd like to see. Now that we've analyzed each of the pieces, and that I've listened through them several times, here's my rating. Drumroll, please. From most intentional to least intentional. Coming in 8th place for most intentional is Amy's song, The Bum Steer. 7th most unintentional is Deal with the Devil. 6th place is Soft Jazzercise. Coming in 5th place is I Can't Play Piano Part 3. The musical ideas in Jon's solos here are the most on rhythmically and in terms of pitch, heightened by the constant call and response at the expense of those ideas being relatively basic. Coming in 4th place is I Can't Play Piano Part 4. The comping in this one doesn't use traditional voicing, but is rhythmically consistent and repeated enough to make logical sense, with soloistic ideas that have slightly more flubs than Part 3, but not enough to derail the lines much of the time. Coming in 3rd place is I Can't Play Piano Part 2. This one is rhythmically incredibly dicey, but mostly within the scale, barring a few minor exceptions. Coming in 2nd place is It Had to Be You. The opening and closing statements of the main tune, or the head, sound quasi-intentional, and the solos sound relatively random since Jon switches to using the white keys over a mostly black keys song. Rhythmically during the solos there is some reference to the tune and consistency sprinkled throughout. It's a shame this one is so low, because I was really impressed at Jon's ability to match the rhythm in the head, but the solos are just so messy in that one, so that's why it's the 2nd most unintentional one. And of course, coming in 1st place for the most unintentional sounding track on this album is the legendary I Can't Play Piano Part 1. Easily the most unintentional sounding track on the album, it's nearly impossible to pick up on coherence from Jon at almost any point, where there are literally more wrong sounding notes than right ones. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what I do, you can support my Patreon account where I post updates for Now and Zen or any other music and video ideas. Whenever I transcribe music for free as a YouTube video, the PDF can usually be downloaded from there. Also, microtonal tabs and chord charts from my cover songs end up there too, something that a lot of people act quite interested in. What should I do for 100 patrons? Wrong answers only.